Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about libertarians. And I consider myself to be an independent. However, I have run as a libertarian candidate. Prior to that, I ran as a Green Party candidate probably 3 times. And the Green Party wasn't too happy when I ran as a libertarian. Um, I really wasn't going to share this story because I was trying to remain somewhat anonymous. But I'm going to tell y'all my personal history with the Libertarian Party. Okay, so I ran as a Libertarian, right, in a primary, and they had a convention, which I'm not going to say which state it was, but I was supposed to be one of the speakers at this convention as a candidate, right? And so the convention was about 5 hours away, probably 6 with traffic, and so I got there a little bit late, but I didn't actually miss my turn because the other candidates were still speaking. It wasn't my turn to speak. When I got up there, they had basically taken all the time. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I just drove 6 hours to get here. Like I was supposed to speak. And they said, no, you weren't supposed to. I'm like, yeah, I was. First of all, let me just back up. When I first walked into the room, everybody was staring at me, right? They were coming up to me. They thought that I was a reporter. They thought I was a spy. Um, they were like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm a candidate, right?" Somebody pulled me in the hallway and started asking me all these questions because they thought I didn't belong there. Basically, I was the only black guy there, and they singled me out. Um, and then when they found out that I was a candidate, then they let their guard down. Then they were all just like, oh yeah. They kept telling me that it had nothing to do with race while making it about race. They kept talking about how um, they wish more black people would be libertarian. Um, and so this to cut to the chase. So I finally got up there, right? I wasn't able to get up there. I was supposed to have like 30 minutes to speak, but they basically cut it down to about 2 minutes, and I just had to give a very condensed version of what I wanted to say. And when I gave my speech, I had standing ovations, right? They were just eating everything that I set up because it's not like I disagree with the libertarians. They're right on many issues. The problem is that libertarians are statists, at least the version in America. I consider myself a classical liberal. I don't um, I don't consider myself a libertarian just because of the stigma that comes with it. Libertarians to me in America are not true libertarians. They don't even know what true libertarian is, libertarianism is. And so, yeah, when it comes to many social issues, even though I consider myself an anarchist, I still think that it's the government's responsibility because the government created a lot of these problems, especially with things like student loan debt. Um, I've been wanting to do content about it. Robbie was debating Brianna Joy Gray about student loan debt. He's a libertarian, but he's a statist libertarian. I'm an anti-statist libertarian. He was saying that the government should not bail out students because personal responsibility and all this other stuff. No, the government created the problem. I hope to be able to talk about this in greater detail, but I'm very short on time. I have a lot going on. So I'm just going to give y'all the condensed version. Basically, the government created the problem. Um, the government requires us to get education in order to get their occupational licenses. Oh my gosh, my microphone wasn't even on the whole time. Okay, so the government created the problem. The government requires us to get education for their occupational licenses. The government increases the cost of education through their accreditation and all of their rigmarole. I know more about law school than I do about undergrad. I know that the American Bar Association, which is a private institution, but when it comes to funding, their accreditation matters, is relevant. They rate law schools based on the size of their law library, their research department, all that stuff. Tenureship, all that stuff increases the cost of education. So you can't get an education without a license. So you have to attend one of these institutions. So it's the government's fault. Even though I'm an anarchist, I think the government should bail out the students the same way they bail out corporations. Again, I'm an anti-status anarchist, or I'm not going to consider myself a libertarian. And I also disagree with libertarians when it comes to the border, and a lot of them are against abortion. They think that it should be left to the states. No, even Ayn Rand said that abortion should be left to the individual. So libertarians are all over the place. They don't understand a lot of the things that they're saying. They don't even understand the origin of it. Ayn Rand despised libertarians, by the way, because she said that they plagiarized her ideas. Milton Friedman and all of them. But gosh, they don't even follow what the Mises Institute is for closed borders, but most of them are for open borders, not because they necessarily care about migrants. It's because they want to exploit them for cheap labor. So they're trying to undercut the American workers, and they're trying to act like they're so compassionate. No, they're not. When you look at economics, an oversupply of labor leads to depressed wages. So you can't compete. I mean, your labor is your currency. That's your leverage, right? But you can't compete when they can just undercut you by bringing in migrants. So open borders is anti-workers, is anti-American. I don't. Libertarians used to be all for closed borders. Now all of a sudden they changed because they're capitalists and they're status. So at least the Americans. So let me start out by showing this clip from Noam Chomsky, because he really does explain all this stuff very well. If I have more time, I'm going to be talking more about Noam Chomsky, because Noam Chomsky is an anarchist, but he actually is a traditional libertarian, which is an inversion of the American version of libertarianism.
Libertarian throughout.
By the way, the volume is poor, so I'll just try to tell you what he said.
Modern European history meant socialist and anarchist. It meant the socialist movement, the workers' movement and the socialist movement, sort of broke into two branches, roughly. One statist, one anti-statist.
So what he said is that libertarianism broke off into two different factions: statist and anti-statist. I'm an anti-statist. Yeah, the other ones are just they don't understand that capitalism is statism, because corporations are creations of the state. So they're trying to act like they're so woke. They're not. It's so regressive.
The statist branch led to Bolshevism and Lenin and Trotsky and so on. The anti-statist branch, which included Marxists, left Marxists, Pannekoek, Rosa Luxemburg, others, kind of merged more or less into an amalgam with a big strain of anarchism into what was called libertarian socialism. So
So this is the original version of libertarianism. Libertarianism in Europe was referred to as libertarian socialism. They were pro-workers. Really, what we need to call the libertarians in America are libertarian statists or libertarian capitalists. They're not true libertarians.
Libertarian in Europe always meant socialist. Here it means ultra, Ayn Rand or Cato Institute or something like that. But that's a special U.S. usage.
The U.S. sense is quite different. Here, every word has taken on the opposite of its meaning elsewhere. So here, libertarian means extreme advocate of total tyranny.
Right. So they're saying that the American version of libertarianism is an inversion of the European version of libertarianism. It's basically giving all the power to private capitalists with no government oversight, without recognizing the fact that corporations are creations of the state. So you can't eliminate statism from capitalism. Nobody's ever pointed this out to libertarians. The ones in America, they're so full of shit.
That's what libertarian means here. It means power ought to be given into the hands of private, unaccountable tyrannies. even worse than state tyrannies, because there the public has some kind of role. The corporate system, especially as it's evolved in the 20th century, is pure tyranny, completely unaccountable. You're inside one of these institutions, you take orders from above, you hand it down below. You're outside the institutions under what the libertarians want. There's nothing.
I disagree with them that libertarians are less accountable than the government, statism, because at least a corporation can be sued. I can win a lawsuit if I sue a corporation. They don't have immunity, and they have to hire an attorney. So a lot of times I can negotiate with them because they don't want to pay the egregious legal fees that they're going to incur if the lawsuit drags out. If I sue the government, they're not going to negotiate because they're going to be represented by the state attorney general's office, and they have an unlimited amount of resources. So they can drag it out. They can incur the legal fees because those attorneys are salaried. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they're both bad, but I would rather deal with a corporation than to deal with the government.
You can say tyrannies do what they feel like. They're global in scale. I mean, this is the extreme opposite of what's been called libertarian everywhere in the world since the Enlightenment. And that's what's called libertarian here.
Right. It's an extreme inversion of true libertarianism. You have these global corporations that really, I mean, it's like they're a layer. It's like a corporation within a corporation. Then you have these, what do you call them? Where you follow an assumed name, and then you're trying to track who the real entity is, and there's so many layers that you don't even know who the hell you're supposed to be suing. You basically there's tricks to that too, because they try to shield themselves from any liability by layering corporation inside of another corporation till you get 5 corporations deep. You don't even know who the hell you're supposed to sue. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's the most tyrannical thing other than statism directly. Now let's get to this other video where he explains libertarianism in greater detail.
Libertarian socialist concepts, and by that I mean a range of thinking that extends from left-wing Marxism through anarchism. I think that these are fundamentally correct, and that they are the proper and natural extension of classical liberalism into the era of advanced industrial society.
So he's talking about libertarian socialism. That was the original meaning of libertarianism. They were all socialists. And this is based on classical liberalism, which stems from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, all of those people who were classical liberals. They don't follow any of that. They're pro-capitalist.
In contrast, it seems to me that the ideology of state socialism, that is what has become of Bolshevism, and of state capitalism, the modern welfare state, these of course are dominant in the industrial countries and the industrial societies, but I believe that they are regressive and highly inadequate social theories, and that a large number of our really fundamental problems stem from a kind of incompatibility and inappropriateness of these social forms to a modern industrial society. A French writer, rather sympathetic to anarchism, once wrote that anarchism has a broad back. Like paper, it endures anything. And there are many shades of anarchism, and I'm concerned here only with one, namely the anarchism of Bakunin, who wrote in his Anarchist Manifesto of...
By the way, I've done content on Bakunin. Bakunin addressed capitalism, how capitalism is oppressive because capitalists don't produce anything. I mean, I think I may need to replay that live stream so y'all can understand. He really breaks it down. It is from Audible Anarchist channel, and then I just basically gave my commentary on it. Yeah, it explains how we got to where we are. That if you own capital, then basically you're basically going to control everything. So that's the only okay. And then Noam Chomsky explains all of that. this is the reason why anarchists are against the ownership of private property.
1865, that to be an anarchist, one must first be a socialist. I'm concerned with the anarchism of Adolf Fischer, one of the martyrs of the Haymarket Affair in 1886, who said that every anarchist is a socialist, but not every socialist is necessarily an anarchist. A consistent anarchist must oppose private ownership of the means of production. Such property is indeed, as Proudhon, in his famous remark, asserted, a form of theft. But a consistent anarchist will also oppose.
And let me just explain why it's theft, because this is in complete violation of natural law. Under natural law, you can't own property. You can't. I mean, this is a complete legal fiction where you can just buy a property, record it with the county clerk's office, and then some corporation owns it in perpetuity. No, you can't do that. Land belongs to everyone. You have a right to exclude it to the extent that you're using it, but this is how corporations dominate. It's like a monopoly game where you just buy up all the property and then you basically get to sit in your ass exploiting the workers while producing absolutely nothing.
The organization of production by government, I'm quoting, it means state socialism, the command of the state officials over production and the command of managers, scientists, shop officials in the shop. The goal of the working class is liberation from exploitation, and this goal is not reached and cannot be reached by a new directing and governing class substituting itself for the bourgeoisie. It is only realized by the workers themselves being master over production by some form of workers' councils. These remarks, it happens, are quoted from the left-wing Marxist Anton Pannekoek, and in fact, radical Marxism, what Lenin once called infantile ultra-leftism, merges with anarchist currents. This is an important point, I think, and let me give one further illustration of this convergence between left-wing Marxism and socialist anarchism. Consider the following characterization of revolutionary socialism. The revolutionary socialist denies that state ownership can end in anything other than a bureaucratic despotism. We have seen why the state cannot democratically control industry. Industry can only be democratically owned and controlled by the workers electing directly from their own ranks industrial administrative committees. Socialism will be fundamentally an industrial system. Its constituencies will be of an industrial character. Thus, those carrying on the social activity and industries of society will be directly represented in the local and central councils of social administration. In this way, the powers of such delegates will flow upwards from those carrying on the work and conversant with the needs of the community. When the Central Administrative Industrial Committee meets, it will represent every phase of social activity. Hence, the capitalist political or geographical state will be replaced by the Industrial Administrative Committee of Socialism. The transition from one social system to the other will be the social revolution.
And Bakunin explains all this because the workers actually have more value in society. The administrators, the managers, the CEOs, they actually produce nothing. And so I need to play that live stream again, but basically it's hard to justify why they should receive greater compensation than the workers. Like, they basically should be on the same level as everyone else. It shouldn't be horizontal, it should be vertical. You should be on the same level. Like, how do you explain why a CEO makes millions while producing nothing, and then those who actually do produce are basically struggling to survive? So it's just going to get worse, especially when we bring in AI. I don't know why anybody would be thinking about having children. Again, an oversupply of labor leads to depressed wages, and population growth in America is not really through fertility rates. They keep talking about declining birth rates. No, it's not the birth rates. Our population growth comes from migration. Although there are declining birth rates, our population growth continues to expand. These migrants don't reproduce at replacement rate. A lot of them are having like 5 children. So that is a lie. And the whole declining birth rate narrative, I don't know why they're telling people to have more children when they know good and damn well there are no jobs, there is no future. They're telling people this because they know that an oversupply of labor leads to depressed wages. When there's more people, when there's a supply of labor, they can pay people dirt cheap. They can pay rock bottom prices for labor. You're going to be desperate for housing. You're going to be desperate for food. And you're basically going to take whatever you can get because there's so much competition. And they all know this. So the Elon Musk of the world, they're lying. They're trying to promote an agenda. I mean, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth because on one hand, they're telling people to have more children, but at the global level, they're telling people that they need to reduce birth rates. Yeah, I'm going to be talking more about population growth and all that stuff and how it impacts economics because a lot of people got this wrong. They keep thinking that if they have children, they're going to breed themselves out of poverty. No, by having children, you ensure that you're going to be in poverty. I mean, you have finite resources, right? Going to an infinite amount of people. So you need to do both. You need to reduce the birth rates and you need to reduce migrations. That's going to increase the quality of life. Overpopulation is not a myth. You can see it every day that more people means fewer jobs to go around. More people means more traffic jams. Housing prices are going to go up because increased demands. I don't know why people are saying that overpopulation is a myth. And the Green Party in Europe does address overpopulation. For some reason in America, overpopulation is rarely discussed. Most people don't even know what it means. It's not about land space. Yeah, you can crowd everybody into the size of California, but their quality of life is going to be poor. So if you want to live in a big 2-car garage, if you want to have land and all that stuff, you're going to have to reduce the population.
The political state throughout history has meant the government of men by ruling classes. The Republic of Socialism will be the government of industry administered on behalf of the whole community. The former meant the economic and political subjection of the many. The latter will mean the economic freedom of all. It will be, therefore, a true democracy. These remarks are taken from a book called The State, Its Origins and Function, written by William Paul in early 1917, just prior to Lenin's State and Revolution, which is his most libertarian work. William Paul was one of the founders of the British Communist Party, later the editor of the British Communist Party Journal. And it's interesting that his critique of state socialism resembles very closely, I think, the libertarian doctrine of the anarchists, in particular in its principle that the state must disappear to be replaced by the industrial organization of society in the course of the social revolution itself.
And this is a misnomer about anarchy. People think that we just support lawlessness. That's not what it means. Anarchists are against statism. We want to eliminate the state. That doesn't mean that you can't have law. Like the state is basically a fictitious corporate entity which controls our lives. It's something that is nebulous and nefarious. The state has its own will, which is supposed to serve the common good, but really is self-serving. And anarchists also are against any authority which is illegitimate. And to anarchists, any authority which isn't based on consent is inherently illegitimate. So just because the majority of people decide that they want to, I don't know, fine people who go over the speed limit, that does not make it legitimate. I did not consent to that, and the only basis for that authority is a threat of physical force.
Proudhon in 1851 wrote that what we put in place of the government is industrial organization, and many, many similar comments can be cited. That, in a sense, is the fundamental idea of anarchist revolutionaries. What's more important than the fact that many such statements can be cited is that these ideas have been realized in spontaneous revolutionary action several times. For example, in Germany and Italy after the First World War, in Catalonia in 1936. One might argue, at least I would argue, that council communism in this sense, in the sense of the long quotation that I read, is the natural form of revolutionary socialism in an industrial society. It reflects the intuitive understanding that democracy is largely a sham when the industrial system is controlled by any form of autocratic elite, whether of owners, managers, technocrats, a vanguard party, a state bureaucracy, or whatever. Under these conditions of authoritarian domination, the classical liberal ideals, which are expressed also by Marx and Bakunin and all true revolutionaries, cannot be realized. Man will, in other words, not be free to inquire and create, to develop his own potentialities to their fullest. The worker will remain a fragment of a human being, degraded, a tool in the productive process directed from above.
And Bakunin also explains this, that democracy is a sham because the working class basically cannot, they're working so much that they don't really have time to educate themselves on what's going on in the government. So they're basically going to defer to whatever misinformation they're given. They're going to defer to the media or the miseducation system. So it's a sham. It's a sham to think that it's a free society just because you have the ability to vote. You're ignorant. I mean, not the masses are ignorant, right? They don't know what's going on. This stuff is going on behind the scenes. They're voting based on manufactured consent. Even though you have the free choice to vote, the media and the education apparatus is telling you how to vote. So it's not a free society, it's mind control.
Now, the ideas of revolutionary libertarian socialism in this sense, they've been submerged in the industrial societies of the past half century. The dominant ideologies have been those of state socialism and state capitalism. But there's been an interesting resurgence in the last couple of years. In fact, the theses that I quoted from Anton Pannekoek, these were taken from a recent pamphlet of a radical French workers group. And the quotation that I read from William Paul on revolutionary socialism was taken from a paper by Walter Kendall at the National Conference on Workers' Control in Sheffield, England last March. Both of these groups, the French and the English one, represent something significant. The workers' control movement in England in particular has developed into a, I think, remarkably significant force in the last few years.
Okay, I know you guys probably aren't going to stay here, but I know this is boring, but I need to lay out some of this foundational stuff, because when I start talking about Bakunin and Noam Chomsky and all this other stuff, I want y'all to know what I'm talking about, that I'm not making this stuff up. Like Noam Chomsky explains all this stuff. And by the way, Noam Chomsky, he is an anarchist. So, yeah, I want y'all to know what anarchy actually means, and that we are pro-workers. And we're basically just anti-statist. We're not lawless. We just don't believe in illegitimate authority. And just because men with guns can control our lives, that does not make it legitimate.
It includes some of the largest trade unions, for example, the Amalgamated Engineering Federation, which I think is the second largest trade union in England, and which has taken these principles as its fundamental ideas. It's had a series of successful conferences, putting out an interesting pamphlet literature. And on the continent, there are parallel developments. May 1968 in France, of course, accelerated the growing interest in council communism and similar ideas, other forms of libertarian socialism in France and Germany, as it did in England. Given the general conservative cast of our highly ideological society, it's not too surprising that the United States is relatively untouched by these currents, but that too may change. The erosion of the Cold War mythology at least makes it possible to discuss some of these questions. And if the present wave of repression can be beaten back, if the left can overcome its more suicidal tendencies and build on the achievements of the past decade, the problem of how to organize industrial society on truly democratic lines, with democratic control in the workplace as well as in the community, this should become the dominant intellectual issue for those who are alive to the problems of contemporary society. And as a mass movement for revolutionary libertarian socialism develops, as I hope it will, speculation should proceed to action.
When he talks about democratic practices, he's not talking about democracy the way that most people talk about or discuss it. He's talking about voluntary cooperation, which is a tenet of anarchy. that we don't believe in force. We believe in consensus, working together, finding solutions. We don't believe in a top-down approach. We believe in a vertical approach. So, yeah, that's not. Yeah, democracy is a sham.
Now, it may seem quixotic to group left Marxism and anarchism under the same rubric as I've done, given the antagonism throughout the past century between Marxists and anarchists, beginning with the antagonism between Marx and Engels on the one hand and, for example, Proudhon and Bakunin on the other. In the 19th century, at least, their differences with regard to the question of the state was significant, but in a sense it was tactical. The anarchists were convinced that capitalism and the state must be destroyed together. Engels, in a letter of 1883, expressed his opposition to this idea as follows. The anarchists put the thing upside.
I don't know if y'all know who Engels is, but Engels was an associate of Karl Marx. They wrote letters between the two of them. I'm not sure why Engels isn't as well known as Karl Marx, but yeah, if I ever get time, I'm probably going to. I keep talking about all these ideas. I just don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to cover all these people.
Down. They declare that the proletarian revolution must begin by doing away with the political organization of the state, but to destroy it at such a moment would be to destroy the only organism by means of which the victorious proletariat can assert its newly conquered power, hold down its adversaries, and carry out that economic revolution of society without which the whole victory must end in a new defeat and in a mass slaughter of the workers, similar to those after the Paris Commune. Now, the Paris Commune, I think it's fair to say, did represent the ideas of libertarian socialism, of anarchism, if you like, and Marx, of course, wrote about it with great enthusiasm. In fact, the experience of the Commune led him to modify his concept of the role of the state, as you can see, for example, by looking at the introduction to the Communist Manifesto, the edition of it that was published in 1872, and to take on something like a more anarchist perspective of the nature of social revolution. Well, the Commune was, of course, drowned in blood, as the anarchist communes of Spain were destroyed by fascist and communist armies. And it might be argued that more dictatorial structures would have defended the revolution against such forces. But I doubt this very much. At least in the case of Spain, it seems to me that a more consistent libertarian policy might have provided the only possible defense of the revolution. Of course, this can be contested, and it's a long story, which I don't want to go into here. But at the very least, it's clear that one would have to be rather naive after the events of the past half-century to fail to see the truth in Bakunin's repeated warnings that the red bureaucracy would prove the most vile and terrible lie of the century. He once said, take the most radical revolutionary and place him on the throne of all Russia, he said in 1870, or give him a dictatorial power, and before a year has passed, he will become worse than the Tsar himself. I'm afraid in this respect, Bakunin was all too perceptive, and this kind of warning was repeatedly voiced from the left. For example, the anarcho-syndicalist Fernand Pelloutier asked in the 1890s, must even the transitory state to which we have to submit necessarily and fatally be the collectivist jail? Can't it consist in a free organization limited exclusively by the needs of production and consumption, all political institutions having disappeared? I don't pretend to know the answer to that question, but I think it's tolerably clear that unless the answer is positive, the chances for a truly democratic revolution that will achieve the humanistic ideals of the left are perhaps rather slight. I think Martin Buber put the problem quite succinctly when he said, one cannot, in the nature of things, expect a little tree that has been turned into a club to put forth leaves. For just this reason, it's essential that a powerful revolutionary movement exist in the United States if there are to be any reasonable possibilities for democratic social change of a radical sort anywhere in the capitalist world. And comparable remarks, I think, undoubtedly hold for the Russian Empire. Lenin, till the end of his life, stressed the idea, I quote, that it is an elementary truth of Marxism that the victory of socialism requires the joint effort of workers in a number of advanced countries. At the very least, it requires that the great centers of world imperialism be impeded by domestic pressures from counter-revolutionary intervention. Only such possibilities will permit any revolution to overthrow its own coercive state institutions as it tries to bring the economy under direct democratic control. I've mentioned so far two reference points for a discussion of the state: classical liberalism and libertarian socialism. They're in agreement that the functions of the state are repressive and that state action must be limited. The libertarian socialist goes on to insist that the state power must be eliminated in favor of the democratic organization of industrial society, with direct popular control over all institutions by those who participate in as well as those who are directly affected by the workings of these institutions. So one might imagine then a system of workers' councils, consumers' councils, commune assemblies, regional federations, and so on, with the kind of representation that's direct and revocable, in the sense that representatives are directly answerable to and return directly to the well-defined and integrated social group for which they speak in some higher order organization.
Well, an easy solution would be to eliminate private corporations. And prior to the 20th century, all corporations were public, right? And then they created the private corporation, which has led to all these problems. So when they were public corporations, they had to serve a public purpose. They could not exist in perpetuity. They had to be reviewed by the public every 7 years or so. So that would be one solution. Yeah, I don't understand how you can have a corporation that exists in perpetuity and the corporation basically has become a person which has more rights than a flesh and blood human being, and the government basically serves corporations. Yeah, this is a problem, and I don't know. I think that at this point it's too late to fix it. I think you have to dismantle the entire system. Noam Chomsky is basically saying the opposite, but I think you do have to dismantle it and start fresh. There's no way to fix this system. It's too corrupt.
Something obviously very different than our system of representation. Now, it might very well be asked whether such a social structure is feasible in a complex, highly technological society. There are counter-arguments, and I think they fall into two main categories. First category is that such an organization is contrary to human nature, and the second category says roughly that it's incompatible with the demands of efficiency, and I'd like to briefly consider each of these. Consider the first, that a free society is contrary to human nature. It's often asked, do men really want freedom? Do they want the responsibility that goes with it? Or would they prefer to be ruled by a benevolent master?
No, and I'm going to answer that. I'm going to say that most men don't want to be free. They say they want to be free, but when you look at their actions, they don't want the responsibility. They don't even want the responsibility of being in charge of their own households. They want to defer to someone else because it's easier. When you tell people about freedom and you try to get them galvanized to get out there and fight for freedom, they don't support that. Most people are hardcore statists. They support statism. They want the government controlling every aspect of their lives, mainly because it makes them feel safe. Bakunin explains all of this stuff. Yeah, so that is the answer to that. Most people do not want to be free. They see the government as having a legitimate authority over their lives. They accept statism as a civil religion. And so when you talk about the government, you're basically talking about God. It's blasphemy to say anything that is anarchistic.
Consistently, apologists for the existing distribution of power have held to one or another version of the idea of the happy slave. 200 years ago, Rousseau denounced the sophistic politicians and intellectuals who search for ways to obscure the fact, so he maintained, that the essential and defining property of man is freedom.
So he's talking about the happy slave. And I'm going to come back and talk about my dad who, I told y'all he passed away last month. But even on his deathbed, he was basically still praising the government, telling me to stop following my lawsuits, stop fighting against the system. And he was still trying to convince me to have children. He told my niece to have children. I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I need to talk about that in greater detail because I thought that on his deathbed, when he was in agonizing pain, that maybe he would wake up. But no, he didn't have any regrets about any of this stuff. and he wanted more future generations to basically experience whatever he experienced. So he pretended that he was an anti-natalist. Because when I talked about anti-natalism, yeah, I'm going to have a whole conversation about that. Somebody was asking me to do anti-natalist content anyway, and I think that's going to be an opportunity for me to talk about that. Yeah, I don't think that people really understand what anti-natalism actually means. But let's go back and finish. We're almost done.
They attribute to man a natural inclination to servitude, without thinking that it is the same for freedom as for innocence and virtue. Their value is felt only as long as one enjoys them oneself.
Because they have turned human beings into sacrificial animals. People believe that there's something noble about serving something that is bigger than themselves. So, and not only are they willing to sacrifice themselves, they're willing to sacrifice their own children. So they want to serve the military, they want to serve the government, they want to serve animals, they want to serve everyone but themselves. They think that anything that benefits them is I don't know, malevolent or something. Like, yeah, that I mean, that's how you enslave yourself, that you think that you need to live your life in service to others. Meanwhile, that is not how these government officials think. They don't care about serving others. They're going to exploit your ignorance, the fact that you want to serve, and they're going to use that. It's like a damn narcissist. They're basically collective narcissists, right? They see somebody who has empathy and they exploit it. They even talked about that in Germany, in Nazi Germany, how the Germans were so good-hearted, they wanted to serve their country, and then all of that good nature, their good intent was exploited. And then you basically use their good intent for evil. So yeah, statists may be well-intentioned because they think that they're doing something good, but at the end of the day, they're evil. What they're doing is promoting state-sponsored violence to subjugate everyone else for an illegitimate authority over our lives. Yeah, there's nothing good about statism. Even if you are a socialist, right, you don't necessarily have to be a statist. I do support the common man, but I just don't support the statist component to it, of men with guns coming to my house to throw me in a cage if I don't comply with illegitimate laws.
And the taste for them is lost as soon as one has lost them. As proof of this doctrine, he refers to the marvels done by all free peoples to guard themselves from oppression. True, he says, those who have abandoned the life of a free man do nothing but boast incessantly of the peace and repose they enjoy in their chains.
Right, this is one of the arguments against anarchy, that without the government, there would be chaos, there would be violence. No, you can look all around you and see all the violence that emanates from statism. It's perpetual war. It's a police state where the police are shooting people up, throwing people in cages, beating people in broad daylight. This is what everyone else supports. Anarchists are nonviolent. We don't support this shit. So I guess the most recent example is Haiti, because Haiti does not have a legitimate government. It just erupted into chaos. No, but those people are not anarchists. That doesn't make them anarchists. It may not be a state, but it still is an illegitimate government which is ruling through force. All of those gangs, that's just another form of a government. That's not anarchy.
But when I see the others sacrifice pleasures, repose, wealth, power, and life itself for the preservation of this sole good, which is so disdained by those who have lost it, when I see multitudes of entirely naked savages scorn European voluptuousness and endure hunger, fire, the sword, and death to preserve only their independence, I feel it does not behoove slaves to reason about freedom. A comment to which
that is another misnomer about anarchists. We're told that if you're an anarchist, you're a savage. You're not civilized. You don't support law and order, blah, blah, blah. No, it's the statists who are savages. It's the statists who support perpetual war. It's the statists who are violent. They're the savages, not us. We're nonviolent. And even according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and according to most anarchists and libertarians, we refer to the savage as the noble savage. This is noble, that you can be good, that you can have virtue without having a state to force it upon you. There's nothing noble about being complying with the law. Like, do you have any virtues independent of the state? No, because if there were no laws, you would be going around creating all kind of chaos and inflicting violence on other people. So you basically need the government to put you in your place because you're not noble. So yeah, that's a misnomer. They got that completely backwards. The statists are savages, not the anarchists.
Which we can perhaps give a contemporary interpretation. Rather similar thoughts were expressed by Kant 40 years later. He cannot, he says, accept the proposition that certain people are not ripe for freedom. For example, the serfs of some landlord. If one accepts this assumption, he writes, freedom will never be achieved, for one cannot.
Well, some people are not ripe for freedom, and it's not of their own design. They're basically created to be that way through the miseducation, through the brainwashing. They don't exist in a state of nature. They exist in a state of society. So once you have indoctrinated people through the public education system, through mass media, then they become so degenerate that they're unworthy of freedom. But it's not like they were born that way. Humans are no different from animals. If you put humans in a state of nature, there's going to be violence, but it's not going to be perpetual war. It's not going to be what we have right now. All of this stuff about property rights and all this stuff, and you violated the law because you went over the speed limit. No, that's perpetual violence. That because I went over the speed limit, now some man with a gun is going to come and throw me in a cage. And if I don't pay it, then he's going to take my property through physical force. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we need. I wish I had a partner. I'm thinking about, I want to change my channel, but I need somebody to help me with this because I have a lot of stuff going on in my head, but I don't know how to really put it together in an interesting way to make it entertaining. So I really do need help.
Arrive at the maturity for freedom without having already acquired it. One must be free to learn how to make use of one's powers freely and usefully. The first attempts will surely be brutal and will lead to a state of affairs more painful and dangerous than the former condition, under the dominance but also the protection of an external authority. However, one can achieve reason only through one's own experiences, and one must be free to be able to undertake them. To accept the principle that freedom is worthless for those under one's control, and that one has the right to refuse it to them forever, is an infringement on the right of God himself, who has created man to be free. This particular remark is interesting because of its context as well. Kant, on this occasion, was defending the French Revolution during the Terror against those who claimed that it showed the masses to be unready for the privilege of freedom. And his remarks, too, I think, have obvious contemporary relevance. No rational person will approve of violence and terror, and in particular the terror of the post-revolutionary state, which has fallen into the hands of a grim autocracy, has more than once reached indescribable levels of savagery. At the same time, no person of understanding or humanity will too quickly condemn the violence that often occurs when long subdued masses rise against their oppressors.
Well, people don't even condemn the everyday violence that they see. When they see the police officers gang up on somebody and beat them up or even kill somebody, they basically turn a blind eye. Why? Because they have been conditioned to think that statism is their civil religion. So when a police officer kills somebody or a police officer beats somebody up, on a subconscious level, they basically see it as an act of God. They don't think that the state can be challenged. It was the police officer, therefore he acted in good faith. Even if you put these people on a jury, they're not going to convict a state actor. So, yeah, I don't. They act like they're so nonviolent, but no, they support violence. They just want to control who's able to inflict the violence. So the government can do it, but you as a private citizen, you have no right to defend yourself.
Or take their first steps towards liberty and social reconstruction. Humboldt, just a few years before Kant, had expressed a view very similar to that. He also said that freedom and variety are the preconditions for human self-realization. Nothing promotes this ripeness for freedom so much as freedom itself. This truth perhaps may not be acknowledged by those who have so often used this unripeness as an excuse for continuing repression, but it seems to me to follow unquestionably from the very nature of man. The incapacity for freedom can only arise from a want of moral and intellectual power. To heighten this power is the only way to...
Right. So freedom is an intellectual labor. Like, you have to have a proper education in order to be free. You have to understand the role of government. You have to understand that there are some things beyond the scope of government. But the ignorant masses who think that the government has unlimited power, they don't even teach civics, in high school anymore. They don't understand the role of the Constitution, right? Even when they passed those executive orders during the lockdowns, people thought that just because it was a law that they were valid. It's like, no, it violates the Constitution. And I was talking to somebody, and they were kind of confused. Like, what are you talking about? It's the law. Like, what do you mean the Constitution? No, if it violates the Constitution, then it's invalid regardless. Like, that is the check that if the government gets its authority from the Constitution. The Constitution is the social contract. So if they exceed the authority that is given to them, then whatever they do is invalid. A governor cannot pass an executive order to put people on lockdown. The governor does not have that power. And I was explaining that to someone, and he was really confounded. I'm like, okay, some things to me are so self-evident that I don't feel like I should explain it, but I don't know what other people don't know. So that's the reason why you have to start with the basics. And at some point, I really need to go through the Constitution and explain the role of government and what our rights are, because a lot of people don't even know. A lot of people don't know. They don't have the faintest idea of what their rights are or what the role of government is. So, yeah, I mean, these people are dangerous. How are you voting when you don't even understand what you're voting for?
Apply the want, but to do so presupposes the freedom which awakens spontaneous activity. And those who do not comprehend this, he says, may justly be suspected of misunderstanding human nature and wishing to make men into machines. Rosa Luxemburg's fraternal sympathy.
I want y'all to let that sink in, that they're basically trying to turn human beings into automatons. You're basically just mindless fodder who just obeys the government. You do whatever you're told. You work, you pay your taxes, you pay. Gosh, I don't want to speak ill of my father who just passed away, but he's one of these automatons. He really did not have any independent thought. I felt so sorry for him because I thought he was going to wake up at the end, but he did not wake up. Despite all the pain and agony that he went through, he still praised the government and he still praised God. So, gosh, I don't know what to say about that. He was even thanking the doctors who pumped him full of chemotherapy, which I believe the chemotherapy is what killed him, not the actual cancer. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I think people like that are very dangerous, especially when they have children, because it's a good thing that I am independent thinking, right? Because if I deferred to my father, I would be thoroughly brainwashed. And I think once I separated from my father, when we were estranged, I was able to open my mind and consider other things. And then when I reconnected with them, I'm like, oh, now you're trying to brainwash me all over again. You're still trying to tell me to have children. You're still trying to tell me to obey the government. That's very dangerous, especially when you're a child, because you don't have any ability or capacity to go against your parents. Your parents are the people that you trust most. So, yeah, I'm so glad that I think I would be a good parent, but I don't want the responsibility, because no matter how good you are, you can't be perfect. I think there's a lot that I could cheat someone, but whatever. Most parents are not. I mean, they don't take the role of parenting seriously. So,
pathetic critique of Bolshevik ideology and practice was given in very similar terms. Only the active participation of the masses in self-government and social reconstruction could bring about what she described as the complete spiritual transformation in the masses degraded by centuries of bourgeois class rule, just as only their creative experience and spontaneous action can solve the myriad problems of creating a libertarian socialist society. She went on to say that historically the errors committed by a truly revolutionary movement are infinitely more fruitful than the infallibility of the cleverest central committee. And I think that these remarks can be translated immediately for the somewhat parallel ideology of the soulful corporation, which is now fairly popular among American academics. For example, Carl Kazin, who writes, "No longer the agent of proprietorship seeking to maximize return on investment, management sees itself as responsible to stockholders, employees, customers, the general public, and perhaps most important, the firm itself as an institution. There is no display of greed or graspingness. There's no..."
And Emma Goldman explains all this stuff. I'm going to be covering her too at some point. I've been wanting to cover her for a very long time about what she says about the majorities and how they're basically anti-progress. The majority, they're basically automatons, and any progress really comes from minorities.
No attempt to push off on the workers of the community at least part of the social costs of the enterprise. The modern corporation is a soulful corporation. Similarly, the vanguard party is a soulful party. And in both cases, those who urge that men submit to the rule of these benevolent autocracies may, I think, justly be accused of wishing to make men into machines. Now, the correctness of the view, which is expressed by Rousseau and Kant and Humboldt and Luxemburg and innumerable others, I don't think that the correctness of this is the moment susceptible to scientific proof. One can only evaluate it in terms of experience and intuition. But one can also point out the social consequences of adopting the view that men are born to be free or that they are born to be ruled by benevolent autocrats.
I mean, that is the philosophical question of the day. Are men born to be free or are they born to be slaves, right? Because I think I need to ask that question in some type of format. When people decide to procreate, like, are you creating a sovereign human being, or are you creating someone who's going to be enslaved? I don't think most people even think about that. I don't think most people even think about their own enslavement. They're not rational actors. They're just behaving and reacting to stimuli.
What of the second question, the question of efficiency? Is democratic control of the industrial system down to its smallest functional units incompatible with efficiency? This is very frequently argued on several grounds. Some say, for example, that centralized management is a technological imperative. But I think the argument is exceedingly weak when one looks into it. The very same technology that brings relevant information to the board of managers can bring it at the time that it is needed to everyone in the workforce. The technology that's now capable of eliminating the stupefying labor that turns men into specialized tools of production, this technology permits in principle leisure and the educational opportunities that make them able to use this information in a rational way. And
so in theory, if AI replaces us as workers, that should give us more time to educate ourselves, right? Even Thomas Jefferson wrote about how slavery gave the great thinkers of the time the freedom to think. So this is the reason why those founding fathers were able to sit around writing all these documents, is because of slavery. So when people say that America was built on the backs of slavery, that literally is true. That without slavery, the founding fathers would not have time to sit around reading books and theorizing about what type of society we should have.
Furthermore, even an economic elite which is dripping with soulfulness, to use Ralph Miliband's phrase, is constrained by the system in which it functions to organize production for certain ends: power, growth, profit, but not in the nature of the case human needs that to an ever more critical degree can be expressed only in collective terms. It's surely conceivable, and perhaps it's even likely, that decisions made by the collective itself will reflect these needs and interests, as well as those made by various soulful elites. In any event, it's a bit difficult to take seriously arguments about efficiency in a society that devotes such enormous resources to waste and destruction. As everyone knows, the very concept of efficiency is dripping with ideology. Maximization of commodities is hardly the only measure of a decent existence. The point is familiar, and no elaboration is necessary.
All right, so that is the end. Again, I'm going to play that live stream I did by Bakunin because he explains capitalism and how it leads to tyranny. Yeah, the libertarians in America have gotten it completely backwards. They don't understand what libertarianism is. Libertarians are not supposed to be pro-status, which means you can't be a capitalist because corporations are creations of the state. So they got it completely backwards. And yeah, I consider myself a classical liberal, not a libertarian. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. And I will be back soon, hopefully.